It was 4 a.m. in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The air was heavy with tension, the city still cloaked in darkness. Inside the presidential residence, President Ibrahim Traoré was resting, unaware that a well-coordinated terrorist attack was about to unfold, an attempt not only to destabilize the government but to take his life. In the shadows outside the heavily guarded compound, armed militants moved with terrifying precision. These weren't amateurs. They knew the layout, the patrol schedules, and they had a singular goal: eliminate the head of state and send a chilling message to the nation. But inside the residence, something unexpected happened. At just 6 years old, President Traoré's son had developed a habit of waking early, curious, playful, and often wandering through the halls. That morning, as the world outside remained still, the boy awoke abruptly. Some say it was instinct. Others call it fate. What's certain is that he sensed something was wrong. As he quietly moved toward his father's bedroom, he heard faint but unfamiliar sounds: clicks, murmurs, movement. Not the usual footsteps of the guards or the household staff. Something different. Something dangerous. Without panic but with urgency far beyond his years, he ran into his father's room, tugging at the sheets, whispering rapidly, "Papa, wake up. There are men outside. I heard them." At first, President Traoré didn't fully grasp the situation, but the fear in his son's voice was enough. As a soldier himself, Traoré's instincts kicked in. He reached for his communication radio and called his security chief. No answer. He tried again. Silence. Something was terribly wrong. Within moments, the presidential residence came under fire. The attackers had breached the perimeter, disabling surveillance and silencing guards. Explosions rocked the compound. But Traoré, now alert and armed, secured his son and moved him to a hidden safe zone inside the residence, a location only a few people in the world knew existed. From there, he initiated a direct line to loyalist forces stationed nearby. His son's warning had bought him minutes, crucial minutes that changed everything. As firefights erupted and chaos took over the residence, Traoré coordinated a rapid defense, personally issuing commands over a secure line. Reinforcements poured in, surrounding the area and engaging the militants in a fierce gun battle that lasted nearly 45 minutes. When it was over, several terrorists lay dead. A few were captured, but most importantly, the president and his family were unharmed. Later, during a confidential debrief, intelligence services revealed shocking details. The attack had been planned for weeks. It involved insiders, high-powered, weapons, and a meticulous escape route. It was a coup attempt cloaked in terrorism. And it nearly succeeded, until a 6-year-old child noticed what trained professionals missed. Traoré, a man known for his military discipline and courage, was visibly shaken not by fear but by gratitude. In interviews that followed, he never revealed the full details to the public, likely to maintain national morale and security. But close aides confirmed what many now believe. It was his young son who changed the course of that night, and perhaps the destiny of Burkina Faso. Since then, security protocols at the presidency have been restructured. Trust has become a rare currency, and Ibrahim Traoré, while still a fierce leader on the battlefield of politics and national defense, now carries a private reverence for the quiet heroism of his child. In a world where presidents are protected by elite soldiers, armored vehicles, and the most advanced technology, it was the simple awareness of a 6-year-old boy, a son protecting his father, that made all the difference. Just months after that harrowing night, another incident tested the resilience of President Ibrahim Traoré, this time not with bullets or explosions, but with betrayal from within. It was during a high-level Security Council meeting, held in a heavily fortified section of the presidential palace. The agenda was routine: updates on regional insurgent movements, logistics, and reconstruction efforts. But beneath the surface, tensions had been quietly simmering. Unbeknownst to many in the room, one of the attendees, a trusted military advisor, had been working as a double agent. Colonel Karim B., a decorated officer with over 15 years of service, had earned Traoré's trust over time. He was known for his strategic brilliance and calm under fire. But in recent months, intelligence reports hinted at a leak. Confidential operations were being exposed. Ambushes on military convoys were increasing. And someone, it seemed, had access to the president's most secure briefings. Traoré had grown suspicious, but instead of reacting publicly, he chose to act strategically. He initiated a silent investigation involving only a handful of loyal agents. Their goal was clear: find the source of the leak without alerting the traitor. As weeks passed, the net tightened around Karim. Unusual transfers of encrypted messages were intercepted. Financial anomalies appeared. Offshore accounts, unexplained, travel. And then came the most damning clue: a decoded message confirming a planned assassination attempt set to take place during the very meeting they were all attending. With the clock ticking, President Traoré made a bold move. He allowed the meeting to proceed as planned, knowing full well it could be a trap. But this time, every corner of the palace was monitored, every exit sealed. A special unit of elite guards was positioned out of sight, waiting for the signal. During the meeting, as discussions shifted to troop movements in the north, Colonel Karim subtly reached into his inner coat pocket. It was a small gesture, quick, almost imperceptible, but Traoré had been watching closely. With the calm of a seasoned commander, Traoré stood and addressed the room. "There are enemies in this country," he said, his voice firm. "Some hide in the mountains. Others wear our uniform." At that moment, the elite guards burst in. Karim was apprehended before his hand could fully reach the small, silenced pistol hidden in his coat. The room fell into stunned silence. Under interrogation, Karim confessed to working with a foreign intelligence network aimed at destabilizing Burkina Faso. He had been promised money, power, and safe passage. In return, he had fed them classified information for over a year. The revelation sent shockwaves through the military ranks. A purge followed, sweeping out other compromised officials. New protocols were introduced. Loyalty was no longer assumed. It had to be proven. For Traoré, the betrayal was personal. He had once fought alongside Karim, bled beside him in battle. But this experience hardened him further. Trust became a luxury, and survival, both political and literal, became a game of constant vigilance. Still, the president never lost his resolve. If anything, incidents like these only deepened his commitment to his people. "I do not fear death," he later said in a closed-door session. "I fear failure. Failure to protect this nation, to protect my son, to protect the future." And so Ibrahim Traoré continues to lead, not from behind a desk but from the edge, where danger is constant and every day survived is a quiet victory. Just as the country began to regain a fragile sense of stability, President Ibrahim Traoré was once again tested, this time not by gunfire or betrayal, but by something even more unpredictable: nature itself. It began subtly. Weeks of unseasonal rain battered the northern provinces. Fields flooded. Rivers swelled beyond their banks. But no one anticipated what came next: the worst flash flood in Burkina Faso's modern history. Entire villages were submerged overnight. Roads disappeared. Communication lines collapsed. Hundreds of families were trapped, stranded on rooftops or clinging to trees, waiting for rescue that couldn't come fast enough. The reports came in fast. Over 2,000 people displaced in the first 24 hours. Dozens missing. And in one remote province, Soum, an entire town's dam was at risk of collapsing. If it gave way, tens of thousands downstream would face near-certain devastation. President Traoré didn't wait for ceremony. He ordered immediate mobilization of emergency units, helicopters, amphibious vehicles, and even personally visited the National Disaster Response Center to oversee operations. But the real story, the one few people heard, unfolded far from the cameras. A call came into the crisis center from a small village near the danger zone. A young girl, no older than 10, had somehow found an old radio and managed to send out a crackling, desperate transmission. Help. We're on the school roof. Water is everywhere. My brother can't swim. Please. Most distress calls were logged and routed to local units, but something about this child's voice stopped Traoré in his tracks. Perhaps it reminded him of his own son, or maybe it was the raw fear in her words. He ordered that her coordinates be prioritized immediately, despite protests that larger populations were also in peril. An elite rescue team was dispatched by helicopter. As they arrived, the scene was worse than expected. Rooftops barely visible above brown, rushing water. The school roof held a dozen children and 2 elderly teachers. The girl who had sent the message was standing at the edge, clutching a makeshift antenna soaked to the bone but unshaken. They were rescued just in time. Minutes after the last child was lifted into the helicopter, the building's foundation gave way and was swallowed by the floodwaters. Later, when asked why he'd diverted resources to one small group, Traoré responded simply, "If a child finds the courage to call for help, then we must find the courage to answer no matter the odds." In the days that followed, the government launched a nationwide emergency recovery plan. Temporary shelters were built, food and clean water were airdropped, and Traoré himself visited the rescued children, meeting the young girl who, against all odds, became the voice of hope in a sea of fear. Her name was Aminata, and she, like the president, had taught the nation something powerful, that leadership isn't just about command, it's about compassion, about listening, and about acting, even when it's just one voice calling out in the dark. As the floods receded and life began to return to some semblance of normalcy, another challenge awaited President Ibrahim Traoré, a threat that no amount of military might or diplomacy could have prepared him for. It all began with a whisper, a rumor that spread through the halls of power in Burkina Faso. There were reports of a new, highly contagious disease affecting rural areas in the southern part of the country. What was initially thought to be a simple outbreak of an unknown fever soon morphed into something much more alarming. The disease spread quickly, with symptoms that were unusual, even for experts. Patients would develop high fever, intense fatigue, and eventually severe respiratory distress. But it wasn't just the illness that caused concern. It was the speed at which it spread. Within a matter of days, multiple provinces were reporting cases, and medical facilities began to feel the strain. Traoré, ever the pragmatist, refused to panic. He called for an emergency meeting with his health advisors, leading a quiet but urgent response to what had now become a national health crisis. At first, the disease was deemed a regional concern, until it began to reach the capital. By the time the first confirmed case was reported in Ouagadougou, it was already clear. The country was facing a potential pandemic. With the hospitals overwhelmed and medical supplies dwindling, Traoré turned to the international community for help. However, many nations were slow to respond, distracted by their own crises or facing logistical issues of their own. The situation grew dire. People were falling ill faster than they could be treated. But in a quiet, understated moment, it was Traoré's own actions that became the turning point. With the global response still slow, Traoré made a decision that stunned many of his closest allies. Instead of waiting for external aid, he called for a national mobilization. He activated a network of public health workers, teachers, community leaders, and even local volunteers. They formed an underground, grassroots effort to not only treat the sick, but to educate the public on prevention methods. Through radio broadcasts, printed pamphlets, and door-to-door efforts, Traoré's message was clear: the only way through. This crisis was unity, and every person had to play a role. With a mixture of determination and compassion, he led from the front, visiting the most affected areas, speaking directly to those suffering, and never once showing fear. But the real breakthrough came in an unexpected way. While touring a remote clinic on the outskirts of the capital, Traoré was approached by a young doctor named Dr. Yara Diarra. She had spent weeks studying the disease in her spare time and had a radical theory. The disease was not viral, but a form of bacterial infection that could be treated with a specific, underused antibiotic that was available locally, but hardly ever used in such a context. It was an untested hypothesis, but Traoré, who had come to value the expertise of those on the ground more than the standard protocols, approved an experimental treatment plan. Soon, cases that had been severe or fatal began to improve dramatically. The antibiotic worked, the spread slowed, and within weeks, the worst of the outbreak was over. While the rest of the world caught up to the discovery, Traoré took a moment to reflect on the chain of events. A crisis that could have decimated the nation had been brought under control, not by external aid, but by the courage and ingenuity of local health workers and the collective will of the people. In his national address following the successful containment, Traoré did not speak only of victory. He spoke of resilience of a nation that refused to be defeated by a disease or its own limitations. We are a people who fight, even when the odds are against us. We are a people who trust in each other, who rely on each other. And when we stand together, we are unstoppable, he said. The disease never reached the catastrophic levels that had been feared, but the experience reshaped Burkina Faso's approach to public health. A new emphasis was placed on local research, self-reliance, and empowering communities to take charge of their own destinies. Once again, President Ibrahim Traoré had faced a crisis with grit, determination, and a belief in the strength of his people. And as the dust settled, one thing was clear. His greatest strength wasn't his military background or his political acumen. It was his unwavering belief that the future of his country rested in the hands of those who cared the most about it.